Welcome, one and all. I am your host, Cooper Anderson, and today's book follows the extraordinary story of perseverance, determination, and a farmload of alpacas on this week's episode of Beyond the Manuscript. But before we get to all that good stuff here, I need to introduce my guest for today. Today, my guest is many things. She is a mother, she's a cancer survivor, a fellow North Carolinian, here today to talk about her book, Farm Family, A Solo Mom's Memoir of Finding Home, Happiness, and Alpacas. Please help me in welcoming my guest today, Miss Jane Lee Rankin.
Thank you.
Yeah, how are we doing today, Jane?
We're doing great. Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here and speak to you.
Oh, honor is a little too nice
No,
of a word, I would say, but I'm so glad you're here today. I remember one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show is because I remember the tagline from your book, or one of the taglines, I should say, is armed with nothing but a dream and a toddler. And I go, that is a really good hook for this book and a memoir of your life story here. But to kind of kick things off today, Jane, tell us all about this memoir and this particular time of your life and what inspired you to write it.
okay. So this memoir starts in 1998 when I find out that I am pregnant and I'm just dating somebody. So enter like what are we going to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Always wanted to have children, breast cancer survivor, so a little bit of a medical miracle that I was actually able to conceive a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts from there and how I handle that. And ultimately, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky when I find out that I'm pregnant. My family's from there, it's my hometown. And I have built a life there while I'm launching my cookbook called Cooking Up
Mm-hmm.
a Storm. And I'm on tour when I get pregnant. So I'm back and forth to Louisville when that happens. And the whole crux of the story is what do I do about that? And I ultimately end up leaving Louisville with this crazy, insane idea of raising alpacas on a mountaintop in the mountains of North Carolina. And so that's the story. And
Mm-hmm.
it ends about the time that my son's 13, 14 years old and we're celebrating Thanksgiving. So
Mm-hmm.
on the farm with a boatload of animals. What did you say? A farm full of animals. So
Yeah.
alpacas, lots of other animals. And it's a real journey because I went through lots of different things, not only as a solo mom and a breast cancer survivor, but also as a new farmer. I'm a first generation farmer. So the mountains of North Carolina and the weather systems are not always so forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
They're a little bit brutal and it was a little bit of like, Annie, get your gun and, conquer the West
Yeah.
in a way.
So for those who don't know, because I've spent a good amount of time in North Carolina, the Appalachian Mountains are a good mixture of either it's going to be perfect weather or there's like some kind of witch's curse happening to the land right there. Where I remember one time it was like May and I was house sitting for a friend, and all of a sudden, because of the really high elevation, just a small like flurry of snow just just comes in for like 20 minutes at a time, and I'm just like losing my mind, and I'm like, is time speeding up or slowing down? I don't know which. What is happening?
It's
So
May,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So
Yeah,
it's a very well, you're never bored. I guess that's probably the best way to say it. You're never bored in the mountains
right,
in North
right,
Carolina for
right.
sure.
And weather is really a force to be reckoned with.
Hmm.
I mean, other people deal with hurricanes, tornadoes, those kinds of things, but winter weather, I mean, any weather can be pretty forceful here. Like the
Hmm.
rains are seem in some ways seem rainier and we have lots of flooding and that kind of thing because when we get a bunch of rain, it all goes downhill and it
Yeah.
all goes to the same areas. And so,
Hmm. Another last weather fact about North Carolina here as well is that North Carolina is the number 2 state for amount of lightning strikes. Number 1 is Florida, and that's why they have the hockey team Tampa Bay Lightning in Florida. But number 2 is North Carolina. And I remember several times because I've done my fair share of farm work myself. There was like there's a cow pasture and this storm kind of just rolls in kind of out of nowhere, and we're gathering up all these cows. There's one just way off into the field,
Oh.
lightning hits it, and just kind of cooks it
Mm.
right there in the field. Not to get terribly graphic, but yeah, when you have like a big open field in North Carolina, yeah, you got to look out for lightning.
Yeah, I've never been afraid of lightning until I moved, till I lived this high in the mountains, and it's
Mm,
no joke. I mean, when the clouds are that close,
yeah,
lightning's that close too. So,
absolutely.
yes.
But going back to your particular story here, you're going on. You said you were on tour for a cookbook. It sounds like you were really building this, this career of your own of what you want to do with life, and then you get kind of hit with this curveball here. What's going through your mind when you find out, and then you have to make like other decisions behind that? How did that? What was that process like for you?
Ultimately, it was my biggest dream was to have children, right?
Mm,
Not one as a woman, not one that we can hang our hats on because it requires having somebody else involved, right? So
mm,
it's like if you're not in a relationship, it's sort of, I mean, I guess you could make it happen, but it was not, I wasn't willing to do that, right?
mm,
So for me, it was this sort of sneak attack of my biggest dream coming true without me making it happen. Does that make any sense?
mm.
That makes any sense?
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, on this trajectory of writing, which had always been a dream of mine, and out touring and being involved in book expos and author panels and those kinds of things. So I was on both hands. It was super exciting and my dream come true, and a little bit of a juxtaposition of what does this mean, although I continued doing what I was doing, and Will went with me to writers conferences,
Mm.
book signings. I mean, you can take a baby along to those kinds of things. It wasn't, if I'd been in corporate America, it might have been a little bit different of a juxtaposition to have a child and be involved in what I was involved with. And I remember before, like while I was launching the cookbook, I had this thought of this is exactly what I want to do. And what would I write about next? And it was, I just had this intuition that I needed to create a writable life, a life that I
Mm,
could write about,
mm,
which is ultimately what I did. Not, it was not an intention as I was doing it, but that was one of my thoughts early on was I need a writable life.
mm. Very cool. And so now, one thing too, I want to kind of point out is the amount of like bravery you kind of need to make such a drastic change in your life of not
Mhm.
just like, okay, so I'm writing a cookbook, I'm going tour there. Okay, now I'm having a kid. Now I'm going to go to another state that I've never, lived in before, and I'm going to start a new career in a in a new field of farming because you said you're first generation farmer, and so um, the question I have for that is, um, was going through like surviving cancer. Did that ultimately give you like the courage of, I mean, like, you know what? I lived through this. I bet I could live through going on a farm and herding alpacas and stuff like that. Is that how that worked, or was it just like, you've always been this kind of determined?
Good question. I think ultimately cancer gives us permission to live in a way
Mm,
that not having or having our lives threatened
mm-hmm,
really gives us permission to live in a way
mm,
that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise. Right. I mean, it was like, you're just kind of like, well, roll the dice. You know, you got a dream, let's do it. You don't know how long you have. You don't know what's next. You faced it. So there was a little bit of that went on with me which was just whatever. And I met this alpaca, and the interaction that I had was so powerful that it became sort of the dream that pulled me through all of that. So while I did have thoughts, I'm leaving my town of origin, I'm leaving the support system I have, I'm going someplace I don't know anybody. I had those thoughts, but it was more like instead of thinking about that, it was I'm going to go raise alpacas.
mm.
I'm going to start a farm.
This is
So
going to happen. Like
it's a going to
I'm going to make,
happen, not
yeah.
a what I'm leaving behind. And trust me, there were moments of, have you lost your ever living mind? I mean, I can remember driving. So when I was driving here the first time we came for a weekend to look for, and we was myself and a 1.5 year old. So that was the we. So we came for a weekend to find a place to live for a month and check it out, just see how it felt and if it school system was good if it felt like a fit for us instead of just making some plunge to someplace we didn't know.
Mm,
So when we were driving here, I kept, I would think, oh my, what am I doing? And it was like, you know what? If it's the right thing to do, we'll find a place to live that I
mm,
can't say no to. We'll find a piece of land that I
mm,
can't say no to. And that was the mantra that I carried until we found the land.
mm.
And we found the land like within 3 weeks. We found this property that we're still on. And so, it's a little bit like then the rest is history, right? We found the land, and the land has shaped me while I have shaped the land.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to go back for like 2 seconds on where you said that having something as serious as cancer gives you permission to live. That is pretty much almost word for word from a famous quote from a book that I really love to promote. Um, it's called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And you may have heard of it,
I
but
get it.
it's saying the book opens with like, tell me if you've heard this story before. Guy has a heart attack, realizes that he wants to live, quits his job, and then starts opening his own art studio, or goes into filmmaking, or you know doing whatever he actually wanted to do in life instead of having to earn money. And the point being is like, why does your life have to be threatened in order for you to start living it? And I think that it sounds like a pretty powerful message that the people should to walk away from after reading your book.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And that's a wonderful book. Stephen Pressfield is absolutely
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, he's great. I whenever I'm, either dealing with like writer's block or just anything kind of
Mhm,
creative of like, well,
mhm.
why am I doing this, or feeling down about myself, I just put on the audiobook of him reading it and I'm like, oh, this
Oh
is
yeah,
exactly
yeah,
what I want to do. It's a great book. I highly
right,
recommend it,
right.
for sure. So tell me specifically, beyond just the world of alpacas, what do you do on your farm? What do what are you growing? What are you raising? And also how do you interact with your local community? Tell me all about that aspect.
Wow. Okay. So we are open right now. We're open 7 days a week doing tours. We do a walking tour of the farm. So we now have alpacas and llamas.
Hmm.
We have Angora goats, which are also, so for people who don't know, alpacas are a fiber animal. You shear them once a year for
Hmm.
their fiber. And though I fell in love with them, not as a fiber animal, not as a knitter, not as a fiber person, that is what they're prized for, is their fiber. So at one point we added Angora goats, which are also a fiber animal.
Mm.
So we shear those twice a year. So we have three kinds of fiber. We have alpaca, llama, and Angora goat, which is mohair. So we do the most with the Angora goat and the mohair. So our tour consists of walking around the farm to see all the different animals that we have. In order to keep the alpacas safe, we have llamas on the inside. We have donkeys in a perimeter around them. So there's
Hmm.
alpacas, llamas, donkeys. Then we have Angora goats, and to keep them safe, we have Great Pyrenees. So we have 4 Great Pyrenees on the property. Then we have a host of other animals that we have rescued along the way. So we have 2 horses, which are rescue horses, and we have a cow, which is a zebu that we've
Mm.
rescued, and the goats, the donkeys, and we have chickens. So we have eggs. We're producing eggs. The main product that we produce is mostly fiber based. We make yarn from the alpaca fiber and the mohair. So we have both of those in our store, but we also are a store of other yarns. And so we specialize in alpaca yarn, fair trade from Peru, or American connection. So that's kind of where you draw the line. And we sell lots of alpaca products, lots of alpaca stuffed animals to the kids that come. And we have goat stuffed animals, and we have donkey stuffed animals, and we have dog stuffed animals, right? So we have all of that.
Hmm.
And so the main thing we do is our tour. That's our main business and our store. But we've also branched out into other activities. Like in the summer, we have an artist who comes in who does barn quilts, and he
Mm.
designs the quilts, tapes the boards, primes the boards, and people come and paint their barn quilt board. It's like a 2 foot by 2 foot square. They're beautiful. And we have goat yoga when the goats are little. We have our,
Yeah.
our kids that are little. And we have a class that we call Knitting with the Alpacas. We just did that this weekend, where we sit in we have like a fenced in area in our alpaca field so that you're like right there in with the alpacas. But you don't have alpacas like walking through and grabbing your yarn and knocking your drink over and things like that. So we
Right.
do events like that as well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So this next question is a bit of a two-parter here. When you were first starting off, what would you say was either the hardest or like the biggest learning curve that you had to like learn or get over? And then also, what was the best part about starting this new chapter in your life?
So I'll start with the best part. The best part was starting a farm is a great way to raise a son.
Mm,
And so the two of us got to live this adventure. And there's that element of being around children that you get to be a child yourself a little bit and do
hmm
things that you wouldn't normally do. So it was a little bit like re-raising myself in an environment that I would have chosen maybe if I'd had a choice, right? Like
hmm
that would have been a great place to come to raise myself or to learn to live. And he got to experience, birth and death and
Yeah.
the hard work and got to be a part of it. And he got to see this amazing thing being built from the beginning to the end. Well, not the end, but the beginning to where we are now.
Yeah.
And the hardest part, I think, was number one, raising a child solo is not easy.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of 24/7 unless I hired a babysitter because I didn't have family here. So that was difficult in its own way. That was a grind in its own way, like a tiring physically tiring thing in its own way. The other piece of it was that the learning curve never ends. I mean, farming
Mm,
is the learning curve or
yeah.
is a learning curve. And I'm still learning. Like there are still things that go on the farm and we just kind of scratch our heads and say, well, there's always something new to figure out, to understand, to learn.
Absolutely, and I do like your point earlier. Is so I've worked on a summer camp that had a working farm on the property, and one of the coolest things about that aspect of the camp was that kids who come to visit for the summer, they get to see, like you said, the
Mhm,
whole cycle
mhm.
of not even of just life, but they get to discover where their food comes from, what goes into growing it.
Right.
And then there's also fun stuff of like, yeah, they get to go play with baby goats after all of the corn has been picked and stuff like that. But you're right. I do think there is a bit too much separation from like people
Oh,
who
totally. Yeah.
don't quite understand where their food comes
Yeah.
from or what goes into actually making the stuff in the grocery store, and then into the actual farm life of where it actually comes from. There's too much of a disconnect there a little bit. So and I think that's quite important just
Mhm.
to
Yes,
learn
absolutely.
about it. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And so the statistic right now is that 2% of people in the United States have a connection to a farm, which means
Mm.
98% don't. And that's a little bit where our business is that we are really in this day and age, we are very hungry for information about that and a
Mhm.
connection to that. So people who come here get a sense of what it's like to be on a working farm. I mean, there may be a tractor, there may be a project that we're in the middle of. We do have a small garden, which is sort of it's like for us, and sometimes we sell stuff from it and people can go in and look at it and they get to see what it is that we're doing from a farming standpoint. We're not doing big crop because we're in the mountains, right? In the
Mhm.
mountains, traditionally 49% of the livestock that in the mountains is cows because those work really well in the mountains, and the other 49% is Christmas trees and 2% is other because of our climate. We have a very
Yeah.
short growing season. So
Mhm.
we are on the site of an old growth apple orchard. And one of our goals this year is to plant a new orchard, maybe intensive growth orchard.
Very cool. So one thing I do want to go back to your book. I don't want to talk about farm the whole time, even though it is fascinating. But you're here for about your book. So one aspect that you kind of point out into your book a lot is the world is going to be a better place if people follow their dreams, right? And so, can you expand on that and what you kind of mean by that?
Following our dreams is it changes everything, right? On a day, I mean, imagine a day where you have all the things that you normally do in a day, right? I
Mhm.
have my accounting that I need to get done and then feed the birds and da 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 da. It's one thing. But if I have a dream, an active dream that I'm working on, so say my dream is that I want to write a novel, right? I want to
Mhm.
write a novel. And I have that day, but 1 hour, 20 minutes of that day is devoted to my dream. It changes the rest of the day
Mhm.
because it layers over it another purpose.
Mhm.
So even and beyond dream, even if I'm organized enough to say I have a goal, like recently I had a goal to get my books into, I think it was like 6 retail locations locally,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And that was a goal. Well, it's amazing what happens just having that goal, that then I run into people and they're like, "Hey, can we carry your book in our store?" And I'm like, and I just wonder, like, if I didn't have that goal, would they have said that? It's
Mhm.
interesting to see that it changes the trajectory of what I'm doing, how I'm thinking in a given day
Mhm.
because I have that goal or
Yeah.
that dream.
Especially if it's like, I would say, if it's a large dream, such as writing a book, or or just anything in general that hey,
Mhm.
I can't do this in a day. It's going to take a while to do this. If you take one step towards your goal every day, you're right. It does change the perspective of your day. Like, all right, you know what? I gotta go do my shift at work, and the dishes are piling up, and I gotta do them when I get home, and I gotta do laundry. But I got a chapter written, and or I filled out a business loan application, which is another step towards getting my own business. Whatever tiny steps you can do is going to definitely change the perspective of your day. Like, all right, you know what? Today isn't great. I'm maybe not in the place I want to be, but I'm moving forward, and that feels
Right,
good.
right. Progress is where it's at.
Mhm.
Progress
Absolutely.
makes such a difference. I think that, it's the days that we don't make progress that are so defeating.
Yeah.
So progress in my goal is that I want to organize my house, or my goal is that I want to plant this garden, or my whatever the goal is, or whatever the dream is, the way that we want to live.
I think that's going to be about it. We're kind of running out of time
Are we
here.
really already?
I know. So,
That was fast.
I know time flies when you're having fun. Before we go though, second to last question is, what is next for Jane Lee Rankin? Like, what are you writing? What are you producing? What's next for you?
What's next is continuing to finesse the farm and create the farm in new ways. We've just opened Airbnb, which is a 1920s house. It
Ooh.
is the original house to this property as a farm stay. So that's one of the next, like in iteration. There's lots more work we want to do around that. It's open, but there's
Mhm.
work that we want to do around. I was just planting plants down there last night. Um, we have cows that we're raising, which are a heritage breed or a conservation breed. So that's one of the things on the next. The apple orchard is on the next. I'm working on, have started playing around with an idea for a novel,
Ooh.
a fictional, which is a whole new thing for me. And then there's, really following and promoting this book in the world
Yeah.
and seeing where this book goes, because we're getting some really interesting conversations like we just had out of it.
Well, if that novel ever does, well, when the novel does come into fruition, because you were a person who, I definitely feel like once you start something, you're gonna see it
Oh,
to
we'll
to
see.
the finish for sure. So when it does come out, I'd love to have you back on the show, and we'll talk about that book
Absolutely. Absolutely.
as well. Last question for today: where can people find your stuff?
So the main portal to find me is through our website at the farm, and it's applehillfarmnc.com.
Mhm.
So that's the main place to find me. I also have one that's janeleerankin.com, but everything's pretty synonymous, and you can get in touch with me through the farm. I'm here every day, so
Mhm.
I'm part of that whole piece, and that's seeming to work really well. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we have good followings there, so we keep everybody's sort of abreast with both like the book and the farm on those social media channels.
Awesome. And of course, the links to everything is, of course, going to be in the description
Right.
down
Right.
below. I want to thank my guest, Jane Lee Rankin, for coming on the show today, for joining us this week on Beyond the Manuscripts, which, of course, is powered by manuscripts where you never write alone. Jane, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful to talk.
Have a great week, okay?
Thank you.